The throne room of Velkar Prime was massive. Its crystal walls stretched high into the purple sky, and light from 3 suns poured through the windows. Princess Lyra sat beside her father's throne, trying to look calm. But inside, her hearts were racing. Emperor Thorn looked pleased with himself. His forearms rested on the armrests of his golden throne, and his black eyes glittered with confidence. Around him stood his military commanders, all of them tall and powerful. They were discussing the war with humanity, and from their laughter, Lyra could tell they thought they were winning. The humans are finally ready to surrender, Commander Vec announced, his voice filled with satisfaction. He was the largest Xinthian in the room, standing nearly 9 feet tall. His purple armor shone under the sunlight. They are sending a diplomat to discuss terms. The other commanders laughed. Lyra had heard this laughter before. It was the sound of people who believed they had already won. She had been listening to talk of the war for months now. The humans were smaller than Xinthians. They were weaker. They had fewer ships and fewer soldiers. By all accounts, they should have lost within weeks, but they hadn't. "How many ships are they bringing?" Thorn asked, leaning forward slightly. "Just one, my lord," Vec replied. "A small transport vessel." They seemed to understand their position. Thorn smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Excellent. Let them come. We will show them what happens to those who resist the Xinthian Empire." Lyra shifted in her seat. She wanted to feel the same confidence her father showed, but something bothered her. The humans had been fighting for 6 months now. They should have surrendered long ago. What made them think they could negotiate now? A guard approached the throne and bowed. "My lord, the human ship has landed. The delegation is approaching the palace. Bring them in," Thorn commanded. "Let us see what these weak creatures have to say." Lyra watched as the massive doors at the end of the throne room slowly opened. 2 figures walked through and the room fell silent. The first was clearly the diplomat. He wore formal clothing in dark blue, and he carried himself with dignity. He was tall for a human, though still shorter than any Xinthian in the room. His brown hair was neat and his face showed no fear. But it was the second human that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. He walked slightly behind the diplomat, his eyes constantly moving around the room. He wore simple black clothing that looked like it was designed for fighting, not ceremonies. He was shorter than the diplomat, with broad shoulders and a lean build. His brown hair was cut very short, and there was a scar running along his jaw. But it was his eyes that disturbed Lyra. They were blue and cold like ice. They looked at everything and everyone as if measuring threats. This had to be Jake Morrison. Lyra had heard his name whispered by the military commanders. They spoke of him like he was some kind of ghost or demon. A human warrior who never stayed down, who never gave up, who fought with methods that the Xinthians considered dishonorable. The diplomat stopped at the appropriate distance from the throne and bowed slightly. The warrior didn't bow. He simply stood there, his hands relaxed at his sides, watching. "I am Connor Hayes, representative of Earth and humanity," the diplomat said. His voice was calm and professional. "I come to discuss terms of peace between our peoples." Thorn laughed and the commanders joined him. "Peace? You mean surrender, human? You have lost this war. Your only choice is to accept our terms." Connor's expression didn't change. "With respect, Emperor Thorn, we have not lost. We remain willing to fight if necessary, but we prefer peace." "And prefer?" Vec stepped forward, his voice angry. "You do not get to prefer anything. We have destroyed half your fleet. We have blockaded your colonies. You are defeated." "We are persistent," Connor replied simply. Lyra noticed that Jake Morrison still hadn't spoken. He simply stood there, his eyes moving from guard to guard, from commander to commander. She realized he was counting enemies, counting weapons, counting exits. It was the behavior of someone who expected violence at any moment. Thorn raised one hand and Vec stepped back. "You speak bravely for someone in your position, human. But words mean nothing. In our culture, disputes are settled by combat. Single combat between champions. The winner's people claim victory." Connor nodded slowly. "We are aware of your customs. If you wish to challenge us to single combat, we accept." The throne room erupted in laughter again. Lyra saw several commanders pointing at the 2 humans, as if they were the funniest thing they had ever seen. The idea that a human could defeat a Xinthian warrior in single combat was apparently hilarious to them. "You accept?" Thorn said, still chuckling. "Excellent. Then I declare that my champion will be Prince Dravok of the Korthan dynasty. He has never been defeated in combat. He will crush your warrior like an insect. At the mention of Dravok, Lyra felt her stomach tighten. Prince Dravok was the warrior she was supposed to marry. It was an arranged marriage designed to unite two powerful dynasties. She had met him only twice, and both times he had frightened her with his aggression and arrogance. Connor turned slightly to look at Jake Morrison. The warrior gave a small nod. It was the first movement he had made since entering the throne room. "We accept your challenge," Connor said. "Jake Morrison will be humanity's champion." "The duel will take place in 3 days," Thorne announced. "That should give your warrior time to prepare for his death." Connor bowed again. "We look forward to it. With your permission, we will return to our quarters." Thorne waved one hand dismissively. "Go. Prepare. Not that it will matter." As the two humans turned to leave, Lyra found herself unable to look away from Jake Morrison. He moved with a strange grace like a predator. Every step seemed calculated. Even when he turned his back to the throne room, she could see the tension in his shoulders, as if he expected an attack from behind. When the doors closed behind them, the throne room exploded with excited chatter. The commanders were already making bets on how quickly Dravok would win. Some said minutes. Others said seconds, but Lyra didn't join in their excitement. She felt cold despite the warm sunlight. Something about Jake Morrison had frightened her on a deep level. It wasn't his size or his weapons. It was something in his eyes. Something in the way he carried himself. He had walked into a room full of enemies, outnumbered and outmatched, and he had shown no fear. Only calculation. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the human warrior. Finally, she got up and went to her private computer terminal. She needed to know more about Jake Morrison. She needed to understand what made him so dangerous. What she found terrified her even more than his cold blue eyes. Jake Morrison wasn't just a soldier. He was a survivor. He had fought in dozens of battles across human space. He had been wounded more times than she could count. He had been captured twice and escaped both times. He had survived situations that would kill any Zynthian warrior 3 times over. But the most disturbing thing she learned was about human psychology. Humans were persistence hunters. On their death world called Earth, they had evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They didn't give up. They didn't quit. They just kept coming over and over until they won or died. Lyra read battle reports from the war. In every engagement, human soldiers fought harder when they were losing. They had something called spite that made them more dangerous when cornered. They used tactics that Zynthians considered dishonorable, but were devastatingly effective, and Jake Morrison was the best of them. She watched video footage of one of his battles. A Zynthian warrior twice his size had attacked him. The Zynthian was faster, stronger, better armed. By all logic, Jake Morrison should have died, but he didn't fight like a Zynthian. He didn't fight with honor or rules. He fought to win. He used the environment. He targeted weak points. He moved constantly, never letting his opponent land a solid hit. And when the Zynthian warrior finally fell, exhausted and bleeding from a dozen precise strikes, Jake Morrison had simply walked away. Lyra shut off the computer and sat in the darkness of her room. Her hands were shaking. Tomorrow she would try to warn her father. She would make him understand that Jake Morrison was not like other opponents. He was something different, something dangerous. But deep down, she already knew her father wouldn't listen. He was too confident, too certain of victory, and that confidence, Lyra feared, would cost them everything. The morning sun felt too bright. Lyra walked through the palace halls with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. She had barely slept after reading about Jake Morrison. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his cold blue stare and remembered the way he had counted every threat in the throne room. She found her father in his private chambers, sharing breakfast with Prince Dravok. The prince had arrived early that morning, eager to fight the human warrior. He sat across from Thorne, his forearms gesturing wildly as he spoke. "The human will break in seconds," Dravok was saying, his voice full of pride. "I have crushed warriors twice his size. This will be the easiest victory of my life." Thorne laughed and poured more drink into Dravok's cup. "I have no doubt, my son. Soon you will marry my daughter, and our dynasties will be united in power and glory." Lyra cleared her throat from the doorway. Both males turned to look at her. "Father, I need to speak with you," she said quietly. Come in, come in." Thorn gestured with one hand. We were just discussing the duel. Dravok assures me it will be quite entertaining. Lyra stepped into the room but didn't sit. She looked at Dravok, then at her father. Father, I don't think this duel is wise. I have been researching the human warrior and he is not what you think. Dravok laughed loudly. You have been researching him? Why? Do you find the little human interesting? I find him dangerous, Lyra said firmly. Jake Morrison has survived battles that would kill any of our warriors. He fights in ways we don't understand. He doesn't follow rules or honor. He just wins. Thorn's expression shifted from amusement to concern. Daughter, what has gotten into you? Are you actually afraid of a human? Yes, Lyra said, and her voice shook slightly. Not him specifically, but what he represents. Humans are not like us, Father. They don't quit. They don't surrender. They fight with everything they have, even when they should lose. I have seen footage of Jake Morrison in battle. He is not normal, even for a human. Dravok stood up, his height making him tower over Lyra. You insult me, Princess. You think I cannot defeat one weak human? I have won 200 duels. 200. I have never lost. That's exactly my point, Lyra turned to face him. You have never faced a human before. They fight differently. They think differently. They are persistence hunters from a death world. Do you even know what that means? It means they are weak creatures who had to struggle to survive, Dravok said dismissively. While they were running from predators, my ancestors were conquering worlds. Lyra felt frustration building in her chest. And yet they have been fighting us for 6 months. We should have defeated them in weeks. Why haven't we? Thorn stood up now, his voice taking on a harder edge. Because they hide and run like cowards. But in single combat there is nowhere to hide. Dravok will crush this Jake Morrison and the war will be over. Father, please. Lyra stepped closer. I am not trying to insult anyone. I am trying to warn you. I watched video of Jake Morrison fighting. He doesn't fight like we do. He targets joints and weak points. He uses the environment. He moves constantly. He makes his opponent exhaust themselves. And he never ever gives up. You sound like you admire him, Dravok said coldly. I fear him, Lyra corrected. There is a difference. I have seen what humans can do when they are cornered. They have something called spite. They fight harder when they should be broken. Jake Morrison embodies this trait. Thorn walked over to his daughter and placed one hand on her shoulder. Lyra, I understand you are nervous. This is a big moment. After Dravok wins, you will marry him and leave our world for his. It is natural to feel afraid. But you must trust me. The humans are weaker than us. Their warrior will fall. Not him, Father, Lyra said desperately. I'm afraid of that human warrior. Specifically him. I have read his record. He has been shot, stabbed, poisoned, and left for dead. And he always comes back. He always wins. Dravok laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. You give this human too much credit. I am faster than him. I am stronger than him. I have 4 arms to his 2. I have natural armor. What does he have? Soft skin and fragile bones. He has experience fighting opponents stronger than himself, Lyra said quietly. He has fought aliens 3 times his size and won. He has survived battles where he was the only human against dozens of enemies. He doesn't fight fair, Dravok. He fights to survive. And humans are very, very good at surviving. Thorn sighed and removed his hand from Lyra's shoulder. Daughter, I appreciate your concern. But this decision is made. The challenge has been issued and accepted. To back out now would bring shame to our empire. Do you understand? Lyra looked at her father's face and saw that he had already made up his mind. Nothing she said would change it. She glanced at Dravok and saw only arrogance and anger in his expression. He was offended that she doubted him. I understand, she said quietly. But please at least watch footage of Jake Morrison in combat. See for yourself what he can do. I don't need to watch videos, Dravok said, crossing his forearms. I will see what he can do when I break him in the arena. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to train. He walked past Lyra without another word. She watched him go, feeling helpless. When they were alone, Thorn spoke more gently. Lyra, you have always been the cautious one. It is one of your strengths, but sometimes caution becomes fear, and fear can paralyze us. Dravok is a great warrior. He will win this duel, and you will become his wife as planned. This is how dynasties are built. And if he loses? Lyra asked. He won't, Thorn said with absolute certainty. Lyra left her father's chambers feeling worse than when she entered. They didn't understand. They couldn't see what she saw. The cold calculation in Jake Morrison's eyes. The way he moved like every step was planned. The reputation that followed him like a shadow. She spent the rest of the day in the palace library, reading everything she could find about humans. The more she learned, the more worried she became. Humans had evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Diseases, predators, natural disasters, even other humans. They had survived by being adaptable, intelligent, and absolutely refusing to quit. They had a saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And they seemed to believe it completely. By evening, Lyra had made a decision. If her father wouldn't listen to her warnings, maybe she could get answers directly from the source. It was dangerous and probably foolish, but she needed to understand. She needed to know if her fears were justified or if she was being paranoid. She contacted the human embassy through secure channels. To her surprise, they responded quickly. Connor Hayes himself answered her call. "Princess Lyra," he said, his face appearing on her screen. "This is unexpected. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Jake Morrison," she said. "In person, privately." Connor's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern, perhaps. Or curiosity. "May I ask why?" "I need to understand what kind of warrior he is," Lyra said honestly. "My father won't listen to my warnings. Maybe if I speak with him directly, I can understand better." Connor was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll ask him. He may refuse. He's not comfortable with formal meetings." "I don't want a formal meeting," Lyra said. "Just a conversation, please." "Wait here," Connor said, and his image disappeared from the screen. Lyra waited, her heart beating fast. She half expected Jake Morrison to refuse. Why would a human warrior want to meet with an alien princess before their duel? But after a few minutes, Connor reappeared. "He agrees. There is a neutral garden in the embassy compound. He will meet you there in 1 hour. Come alone or with minimal guard presence." "Thank you," Lyra said and ended the call. She sat in silence for a moment, wondering if she was making a mistake. Then she stood up and prepared to leave. She told her guards she needed fresh air and wanted to walk in the city. They protested at first, but she insisted. Finally, they agreed to follow at a distance. The walk to the human embassy felt longer than it was. Lyra kept thinking about what she would say. How do you talk to someone you fear? How do you ask a warrior if they are as dangerous as their reputation suggests? The embassy guards let her through without question. Connor had clearly told them to expect her. They directed her to a small garden behind the main building. It was simple compared to Zynthian gardens with green plants and small flowers, but it was peaceful. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the garden looking at a small fountain. He wore the same black clothing as before and his hands were empty. When he heard her approach, he turned to face her. His blue eyes studied her for a moment, and she felt that same chill she had felt in the throne room. "Princess Lyra," he said. His voice was quiet and calm. "Thank you for coming. Though I'm curious why you wanted to meet." Lyra took a deep breath. "I wanted to ask you something. Are you afraid of the duel?" Jake was quiet for a moment. Then to her surprise, he smiled slightly. "Terrified. What?" Lyra blinked. "But you accepted the challenge. You're going to fight Prince Dravok." "Yes," Jake said simply. "Being afraid and fighting anyway are not opposites, Princess. I'm afraid because I understand what I'm facing. Dravok is faster than me, stronger than me. He has more reach and natural armor. By every logical measure, I should lose." "Then why fight?" Lyra asked. "Why not surrender?" Jake looked at the fountain again. "Because that's not what we do. Humans, I mean. We don't surrender when the odds are bad. We find a way to survive. It's part of who we are." "That's what frightens me," Lyra admitted. "I've read about humans, about persistence hunting, about spite, about how you never quit. I've seen footage of you in battle. You don't fight like we do." "No," Jake agreed. "We don't. Zynthians fight with honor and tradition. Humans fight to win. We use everything we have, every advantage, every trick. It's not pretty and it's not honorable by your standards, but it keeps us alive." Lyra sat down on a stone bench near the fountain. "I tried to warn my father. I told him you were dangerous. He didn't listen, neither did Dravok." "People rarely do," Jake said. He moved closer but didn't sit. "We've been underestimated since we entered the galactic community. Every species looks at us and sees soft skin, weak muscles, and thinks we're easy prey. Then they fight us and realize their mistake. Are you going to kill Dravok? Lyra asked quietly. Jake looked at her directly. I don't want to. I want to win and end this war. If he surrenders, I'll spare him, but if he fights to the death, I'll do what I must. The certainty in his voice made Lyra shiver. This wasn't arrogance. It was simply a statement of fact. Jake Morrison would do whatever was necessary to survive and win. You're afraid of me, Jake observed. It wasn't a question. Yes, Lyra admitted. Good, Jake said. Fear keeps us careful. It keeps us alive. But don't let it control you, Princess. I've learned that the things we're most afraid of are often the things we need to face. Before Lyra could respond, Connor appeared at the garden entrance. Jake, we should head back inside. It's getting late. Jake nodded and turned back to Lyra. Thank you for coming, Princess. I hope your fear proves unnecessary. But I understand why you feel it. As he walked away, Lyra sat alone in the garden thinking about his words. She realized something important. Her fear wasn't really about Jake Morrison. It was about her own powerlessness, about having no control over her future, about being forced into a marriage she didn't want. And maybe, just maybe, watching Jake Morrison face his fears would teach her how to face her own. The next 2 days passed slowly. Lyra found herself unable to think about anything except the coming duel. She attended court functions and smiled at the right times, but her mind was elsewhere. Everyone around her seemed excited, treating the duel like entertainment. They placed bets on how quickly Dravok would win. They joked about the small human warrior who thought he could fight a Zynthian champion, but Lyra couldn't join in their excitement. She kept thinking about her conversation with Jake Morrison, the way he had admitted his fear so easily, the quiet certainty in his voice when he said he would do whatever was necessary, and most of all, the advice he had given her about facing the things she feared. On the evening before the duel, Lyra received an unexpected visitor. Her mother, Empress Vara, came to her chambers. Her mother rarely visited anymore. She spent most of her time in the Eastern Palace, away from the politics and war planning that consumed Thorn's days. Mother, Lyra stood up from her desk. I didn't know you were coming. Vara smiled gently. She was smaller than most Zynthian females, with silver markings on her purple skin that showed her age. I heard about your concerns regarding the duel. Your father told me. Lyra felt her face heat up with embarrassment. He thinks I'm being foolish. No, Vara said, sitting down on Lyra's sleeping platform. He thinks you're being cautious, but he doesn't understand the difference between caution and wisdom. I don't understand, Lyra said, sitting beside her mother. Your father sees this duel as a formality, Vara explained. He believes Dravok will win because Dravok is stronger and faster. But you, my daughter, you understand something your father has forgotten. Strength and power are not the same thing. Lyra looked at her mother with surprise. You believe me? About the human? I believe you see something others are missing, Vara said carefully. I watched the recording of the human's arrival. I saw the way their warrior stood in our throne room. He was afraid, I could sense it. But he didn't run. He stood there surrounded by enemies and he observed everything. That is not the behavior of a fool. That is the behavior of a survivor. Father won't change his mind, Lyra said quietly. The duel will happen. Yes, Vara agreed. And whatever happens, it will change things. If Dravok wins, you will marry him as planned. You will leave our world and live with the Korthan dynasty. But if he loses, then what? Lyra asked. What happens to me if Dravok loses? Vara took her daughter's hand. Then you will have a choice. The marriage alliance will be broken. Dravok's family will not want their defeated son to marry a princess of the empire that challenged him. You will be free to choose your own path. The idea startled Lyra. She had never thought about that possibility. Her marriage to Dravok had been decided when she was young. She had always assumed it was inevitable. But if he lost the duel, I don't want him to lose because it will free me, Lyra said slowly. That feels wrong. Why? Vara asked. Because it means I'm hoping someone gets hurt or dies just so I can be free. That makes me selfish. Vara squeezed her daughter's hand. It makes you honest. You are afraid of Dravok, aren't you? Not just worried about the duel. Afraid of marrying him? Lyra felt tears building in her eyes. She nodded. He frightens me, Mother. He is cruel and arrogant. When he looks at me, I feel like I'm just a prize he won, not a person. Just a thing to add to his collection of victories. I know, Vara said softly. I argued against this marriage, but I was overruled. Your father believes the alliance is necessary, but I have always thought you deserved better than to be traded like property." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Vara stood up. "Tomorrow will be difficult no matter what happens. But remember, my daughter, that you are stronger than you think. You have wisdom that others lack. Don't be afraid to use it." After her mother left, Lyra sat alone in her chambers. She thought about everything that had happened since the humans arrived. The way Jake Morrison had unsettled everyone simply by standing still. The way he had admitted his fear but fought anyway. The way he had looked at her and told her not to let fear control her. She realized that she had been letting fear control her for a long time. Fear of disappointing her father. Fear of her arranged marriage. Fear of speaking up and being ignored. She had been so focused on her fears that she had forgotten to think about what she actually wanted. What did she want? The question surprised her. She had never really asked herself that before. Her life had always been planned out for her. First, she was a princess learning to behave properly at court. Then she was a princess being prepared for marriage. She had never been asked what she wanted for her own future. But now, sitting alone in her chambers on the eve of a duel that could change everything, she finally let herself think about it. She wanted to matter, not as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as herself. She wanted to make decisions that affected her world. She wanted to help her people, not just smile and look pretty at ceremonies. She wanted to be brave like Jake Morrison, facing his fears head-on. That night, Lyra made another decision. She returned to her computer and began researching everything she could about human diplomacy. If Jake Morrison won the duel tomorrow, the war would officially be over by Zynthian law. But her father might refuse to honor that agreement. She had seen his stubbornness before. He might try to continue the war anyway, claiming the duel was somehow invalid. If that happened, there would need to be someone to argue for peace. Someone to bridge the gap between Zynthian pride and human persistence. Someone who understood both sides. Maybe that someone could be her. The morning of the duel arrived bright and clear. Lyra dressed in her formal robes and made her way to the arena with her father. The streets were packed with people heading to watch the fight. Everyone seemed excited. Street vendors sold food and drinks. Children ran between adults playing at being warriors. The arena itself was massive. It could hold over 50,000 spectators, and today it was completely full. The noise was overwhelming. Thousands of voices talking, laughing, and shouting. Lyra felt small as she walked through the royal entrance with her father and his advisors. The royal box was located in the center of the arena, elevated so they had a perfect view of the fighting ground below. Dravok's family was already there, seated on the opposite side of the royal box. His father, King Vorath, was a huge Zynthian with golden armor. His mother, Queen Silva, was elegant but cold-looking. They both nodded respectfully to Thorn but said nothing. Lyra took her seat and looked down at the arena floor. It was circular, about 200 feet across, with a sandy surface. There were no obstacles or cover, just open space where two warriors would fight. The crowd's noise grew louder. Lyra turned to see Dravok entering from the south gate. He wore ceremonial armor that gleamed in the sunlight. He carried 4 different weapons, one in each hand. A sword, an axe, a spear, and a club. All of them were sized for his massive frame. He was 8 feet tall and powerfully built. His purple skin was covered in ritual markings that showed his warrior status. The crowd roared with approval. Dravok raised his weapons and turned in a circle, acknowledging their cheers. He looked confident, unstoppable. Lyra felt her heart sink. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she had been worried for nothing. How could any human stand against that? Then the north gate opened and Jake Morrison entered. The crowd's cheering turned to laughter and jeers. Next to Dravok, Jake looked impossibly small. He was only 6 feet tall, with a lean build that looked fragile compared to Dravok's bulk. He wore simple black combat clothing with light armor on his chest and arms. He carried only one weapon, a composite blade about 2 feet long. But Lyra noticed something the laughing crowd didn't. Jake's face showed no emotion. His eyes scanned the arena, noting distances and angles. He moved with complete control, every step measured. And when he looked up at Dravok, there was no fear in his expression. Only focus. Connor Hayes stood near the human entrance, watching carefully. Their eyes met briefly, and Lyra saw concern there. He knew how dangerous this was. He knew Jake might die today. An official walked to the center of the arena. He was a senior judge wearing traditional robes. His voice was amplified so everyone could hear. This is a formal challenge duel under ancient Zynthian law. The rules are simple. Single combat, any weapon except ranged weapons. The fight continues until one warrior surrenders, is unable to continue, or dies. The winner's people claim victory in the war. Do both warriors accept these terms? I accept, Dravok said loudly, his voice full of confidence. I accept, Jake said quietly, but his voice carried across the arena. Then let the duel begin, the judge said, and quickly left the fighting ground. The crowd fell silent. Everyone leaned forward to watch. Lyra found herself holding her breath. For a long moment, neither warrior moved. They stood on opposite sides of the arena, studying each other. Dravok was grinning, his sharp teeth showing. Jake's expression remained neutral. Then Dravok charged. He moved incredibly fast for someone his size. His forelegs carried him across the arena in seconds, his weapons raised. The crowd gasped at his speed. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The moment when the mighty Zynthian warrior would crush the small human. But Jake didn't meet the charge. At the last possible second, he dove to the side, rolling smoothly across the sand. Dravok's weapon swung through empty air. The momentum carried him several more feet before he could stop. The crowd booed. They wanted to see fighting, not running. Someone shouted, "Coward!" from the stands. But Lyra understood what Jake was doing. He was learning. In those few seconds, he had seen how fast Dravok could move, how he preferred to attack, how his weapons moved. It was information he would need to survive. Dravok turned and charged again. Again, Jake dodged, this time moving in a different direction. He was testing Dravok's reaction time, seeing how quickly the larger warrior could change direction. "Fight me, human!" Dravok roared. "Stop running like a coward." The crowd took up the chant. Coward, 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 but Jake ignored them. He kept moving, kept dodging, kept learning, and slowly, Lyra saw something that made her hearts beat faster. Dravok was getting angry. His movements were becoming less controlled. He was swinging harder but less accurately. He wanted to crush this irritating human who wouldn't stand still and die properly. And that anger, Lyra realized, was exactly what Jake Morrison wanted. The real fight was about to begin. The crowd continued to boo and jeer as Jake Morrison circled away from another charge. Dravok had grown increasingly frustrated, his forearms swinging wildly now instead of with the precise control he had shown at the beginning. Sweat glistened on his purple skin despite the cool morning air. Lyra watched carefully. She could see what the crowd couldn't. Every time Dravok charged, Jake moved just a little bit less. He was getting closer to the attacks, learning their exact range. He was mapping out Dravok's patterns, understanding which weapon the prince favored, which arm was strongest, which direction he preferred to turn. Thorn leaned toward one of his advisors. "The human fights like a coward. When will Dravok finish this?" "Soon, my lord," the advisor said. He's just toying with the human first, but Lyra knew better. Dravok wasn't toying with anyone. He was tiring himself out, burning energy on big, powerful attacks that hit nothing but sand. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison had barely used any energy at all. He simply moved and watched. Stand still and fight. Dravok roared, charging again. This time he swung all 4 weapons in a coordinated pattern, trying to cover every possible escape route. Jake dropped to the ground, flat on his stomach. The weapons passed over him, missing by inches. Before Dravok could recover, Jake rolled forward right between the prince's forelegs. As he moved, his blade flashed out once, cutting into the back of Dravok's left rear leg. It wasn't a deep cut, barely a scratch compared to Dravok's size, but it was first blood. The arena fell silent. Nobody had expected the human to land any hit at all, let alone draw blood. Dravok stopped and looked down at his leg in disbelief. A thin line of purple blood ran down to his foot. "Impossible," King Vorath said from across the royal box. That was luck, but Lyra saw Jake's face. There was no surprise there, no celebration, just the same focused expression he had worn from the start. That hadn't been luck. It had been calculation. Dravok's face twisted with rage. "You dare?" He charged again, but this time his movements were wild. He had stopped thinking and started reacting emotionally. His weapon swung in savage arcs, trying to catch the human who had embarrassed him. Jake moved differently now. Instead of long dodges to create distance, he made smaller movements. He would lean back just enough to let a sword pass, turn just enough to avoid an axe, duck just enough to let a spear miss his head. He was staying close to Dravok, inside the range where the longer weapons lost their advantage. And every few seconds his blade would flash out, a cut to the arm, a slash at the thigh, a quick strike at an exposed joint. None of the cuts were deep. None of them would stop Dravok by themselves, but they added up. Purple blood spotted the sand. The mighty prince was bleeding from a dozen small wounds. "This isn't honorable fighting," one of Thorn's commanders muttered. "He targets wounds repeatedly. There are no rules against it," Thorn said slowly. His confident expression had faded. He was watching the fight more carefully now. Lyra found herself leaning forward. She could barely breathe. Jake Morrison was doing exactly what she had feared and hoped he would do. He was dismantling a superior opponent through precision and patience. He wasn't trying to overpower Dravok. He was bleeding him, tiring him, breaking him down piece by piece. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The crowd had stopped cheering. They watched in growing disbelief as the human warrior continued to fight. Dravok was breathing heavily now, his movements noticeably slower. The many small cuts were taking their toll. Blood loss, pain, and exhaustion were adding up. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison moved as smoothly as when the fight started. He hadn't been hit once. Every dodge, every movement was efficient. He wasn't wasting energy on big dramatic actions. He just kept moving, kept cutting, kept wearing Dravok down. "This is a war of attrition," Lyra whispered. "What?" Thorn looked at her. "He's making it a test of endurance," Lyra explained. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They can run for hours, days if necessary. They don't have bursts of great speed like we do. They have stamina. He's making Dravok use all his energy while barely using any of his own." Thorn stared at the arena floor, and for the first time, Lyra saw doubt in her father's eyes. 45 minutes into the fight, Dravok made a mistake. He swung his sword in a wide arc, putting too much force into it. When Jake ducked under the swing, Dravok's momentum carried him off balance. Just for a second. Just long enough. Jake moved with sudden speed. He stepped inside Dravok's guard and drove his blade deep into the joint, where one of Dravok's right arms connected to his body. The prince screamed in pain and dropped the axe he had been holding in that hand. The arm hung useless, bleeding heavily. The crowd gasped. This wasn't a small cut. This was a serious wound. Dravok now only had 3 working arms instead of 4. "Yield," Jake said. His voice was quiet but firm. "You're hurt. This can end now." "Never." Dravok swung wildly with his remaining weapons. But the injury had made him unbalanced. His movements were awkward, compensating for the damaged arm. Jake went back to his patient strategy. Move, dodge, cut. Move, dodge, cut. Each small wound added to the collection. Dravok was leaving bloody footprints in the sand now. His breathing came in ragged gasps. But he refused to surrender. His pride wouldn't allow it. An hour passed. Lyra had never seen a duel last this long. Normally, Xinthian duels were over in minutes. The stronger, faster warrior would dominate and win quickly. But this fight had become something else entirely. It was a demonstration of 2 completely different approaches to combat. Dravok represented overwhelming power. 4 arms, natural armor, superior strength and speed. Everything about him was designed for quick, decisive victory. Jake Morrison represented human stubbornness. He wasn't stronger or faster. He was just relentless. He kept moving, kept fighting, kept refusing to lose. And slowly, impossibly, he was winning. "Father," Lyra said quietly, "Dravok needs to surrender. He's going to die if this continues." "He won't surrender," Thorn said grimly. "His pride is too great." "Then stop the fight," Lyra urged. "You have the authority. Call it a draw." "And admit that a human fought our greatest warrior to a standstill?" Thorn shook his head. "The embarrassment would be too great." Lyra looked at her father with sudden understanding. He was more concerned about embarrassment than about a warrior's life, then about ending the war, then about what was actually right. The realization made her feel cold inside. She looked across at Dravok's parents. King Vorath sat rigid, his face showing no emotion, but Queen Silva had one hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with worry. She knew what Lyra knew. Her son was losing. Her son might die, and there was nothing she could do about it. On the arena floor, Dravok stumbled. His legs were shaking from exhaustion and blood loss. He tried to charge one more time, but it was slow. So slow that even the crowd could see it wasn't going to work. Jake stepped aside easily. As Dravok stumbled past, Jake's blade flashed out one final time. It cut across the back of both of Dravok's rear legs, severing tendons. The prince fell forward onto the sand, unable to support his own weight. His remaining weapons fell from his hands. Jake walked around to face Dravok. The prince tried to push himself up, but his legs wouldn't work. Blood pooled beneath him. He looked up at Jake Morrison with hatred and disbelief. Jake placed the tip of his blade against Dravok's throat. The arena was completely silent. 50,000 Zynthians held their breath. "Yield," Jake said again. His voice carried across the silent arena. "This is over. You fought bravely, but it's over. Yield." Dravok's face twisted with emotion. Anger, shame, pain, disbelief. His mouth opened, and for a moment Lyra thought he would refuse again. That he would rather die than admit defeat. But then Queen Silva stood up in the royal box. "My son," she called out, "please." "I yield on your behalf, Mother, no." Dravok tried to shout, but his voice was weak. "I am your mother and your queen," Silva said firmly. "And I will not watch you die for pride. I yield. The human has won." The official judge rushed onto the arena floor. He looked at Dravok, at Jake, at the royal box. "Does the challenged warrior accept his mother's surrender on his behalf?" Dravok's eyes closed. Tears of shame ran down his face. Finally, barely audible, he whispered, "Yes, I yield." Jake immediately stepped back and lowered his weapon. The judge raised his hand. "The duel is concluded. Jake Morrison of humanity is the victor. By ancient law, humanity has won the war." The arena remained silent for several heartbeats. Then slowly a strange thing happened. Someone began to clap. Then another, then more. The Zynthian crowd, who had come to see their champion crush a weak human, instead found themselves applauding the warrior who had fought for over an hour against impossible odds, and won through sheer determination. It wasn't the thunderous approval they would have given Dravok. It was something else. Respect, acknowledgement, recognition that they had witnessed something remarkable, even if it wasn't the outcome they wanted. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor. They carefully lifted Dravok onto a stretcher. Queen Silva hurried down from the royal box to accompany her son. As they passed Jake Morrison, she stopped. "You gave him chances to yield," she said quietly. "Thank you for that mercy." Jake nodded respectfully. He fought with courage. He has nothing to be ashamed of. Connor Hayes appeared at Jake's side, looking relieved and exhausted. He put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Well done. Now let's get you checked by a medic. You're not injured, but you must be exhausted." "I could go another hour if needed," Jake said. But Lyra could see the weariness in his eyes now. The fight had cost him too, just in different ways than it had cost Dravok. In the royal box, Thorn sat frozen. His commanders looked at each other nervously. They had just watched their greatest warrior lose to a human. By their own laws, the war was over. But what now? "Father," Lyra said carefully, "the law is clear. Humanity has won." Thorn said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood up abruptly and left the royal box without a word. His commanders hurried after him. Lyra remained seated, watching as Jake Morrison and Connor Hayes left the arena. The crowd was dispersing now, thousands of conversations starting at once. Everyone would be talking about this duel for years to come. She thought about Jake's advice, about facing the things you fear, about having courage even when you're terrified, about doing what's right even when it's hard. The duel was over. But Lyra suspected that the real fight, the fight for peace, was just beginning. And maybe, just maybe, she could help win it. She stood up and left the royal box, her mind already working on what needed to happen next. Her father might refuse to honor the agreement. There would be those who claimed the duel was somehow invalid, that human trickery had won instead of true skill. But Lyra had seen the truth. Jake Morrison had won because he understood something fundamental. Strength without strategy is just violence. Power without purpose is just destruction. The humans had been underestimated, and that underestimation had cost the Zynthian Empire dearly. It was time for someone to speak up. Time for someone to argue for peace instead of pride. Time for someone to face their fears and do what was right. And that someone, Lyra decided, would be her. The palace was in chaos. Lyra walked through hallways filled with arguing advisors and confused servants. Everyone had an opinion about what should happen next. Some insisted the duel was legitimate and the war must end. Others claimed human trickery and demanded the fighting continue. A few simply stood in shocked silence, unable to process what they had witnessed. Lyra found her father in the war room, surrounded by his top military commanders. They were shouting over each other, trying to be heard. When she entered, the room fell quiet. "Leave us," Thorn said to his commanders. They hesitated, then filed out. When the door closed, Thorn looked at his daughter with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was defeat. "You were right," he said quietly. "I should have listened to you." Lyra sat down across from her father. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Thorn admitted. "By our laws, the war is over. Humanity won. But how can I admit that to our people? How can I tell them that we lost to a species we believed was inferior? By telling them the truth," Lyra said. "That we underestimated humanity. That we judge them by our standards instead of trying to understand them. That strength comes in many forms, and we only recognized one." Thorn rubbed his face with one hand. "Half my commanders want to declare the duel invalid. They claim Morrison fought dishonorably, that his tactics were beneath a true warrior." "And what do you think?" Lyra asked. "I think we created rules that favor us and expected everyone else to follow them," Thorn said bitterly. "Morrison fought to win, not to look honorable. And he won. That's all that matters in the end, isn't it? Results, not appearances." Before Lyra could respond, there was a knock at the door. A nervous servant entered. "My lord, the human delegation requests an audience." "They say it's urgent." Thorn stood up wearily. "Send them in." Connor Hayes entered first, followed by Jake Morrison. The warrior had been cleaned up and bandaged in a few places where Dravok had managed to land glancing blows. But he walked steadily, showing little sign of the hour-long battle he had just endured. "Emperor Thorn," Connor began formally, "we are here to discuss the terms of peace following today's duel." "You mean to discuss our surrender?" Thorn said, his voice hard. "No," Connor said calmly. "We mean to discuss peace. There's a difference. We won the duel," Jake added. His voice was quiet but firm. "That means the war ends. But it doesn't mean we want to humiliate you. We want a partnership, not a defeated enemy." Thorn laughed without humor. "Why, you won. By your rights, you could demand tribute, territory, anything you want." "Because that's not what humans do," Connor explained. "Our history taught us that defeating your enemy doesn't mean you've solved the problem. The Second World War taught us that crushing a nation completely just breeds resentment and future conflict. But helping former enemies rebuild, creating mutual benefit, that creates lasting peace." "The Marshall Plan," Lyra said suddenly. Both humans turned to look at her in surprise. "I read about it. After your global war, the winning nations helped rebuild the losing nations instead of punishing them. They became allies," Connor smiled. "Exactly, Princess. That's the model we want to follow here." Thorn looked between his daughter and the humans. "You've been studying them." "Yes," Lyra said. "Someone needed to understand them, and I think I'm beginning to." "What exactly are you proposing?" Thorn asked the humans. Connor opened a datapad. "A mutual defense treaty. Open trade agreements. Cultural exchange programs. And most importantly, a joint council where both our peoples have equal say in matters that affect us both." "You would give us equal say?" Thorn said skeptically. "After winning the war?" "We would give you equal partnership," Jake corrected. "Because peace based on domination doesn't last. Peace based on mutual respect and benefit does. We've learned that lesson the hard way throughout our history." Thorn sat down heavily. "My advisors will never accept this. Many of them want to continue fighting." "Then you need new advisors," Lyra said firmly. Everyone looked at her in surprise at the strength in her voice. "Father, continuing this war will only bring more death and destruction. We lost. Not because we're weak, but because we were too arrogant to understand our opponent. The honorable thing now is to accept that loss and build something better." "My daughter speaks wisdom," a new voice said from the doorway. Empress Vara entered, followed by several younger court members. "We have been listening to the old guard argue for hours. They cling to pride instead of accepting reality, but some of us see the opportunity here." "Vara," Thorn said. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting our daughter," Vara said, moving to stand beside Lyra. "And supporting peace. I have lived through 3 wars, husband. I have seen thousands die for pride and territory. I will not watch our people die in a 4th war against an enemy we cannot defeat." One of the young court members stepped forward. He was a junior advisor named Kell. "Many of us feel the same way, Emperor. The younger generation doesn't want endless war. We want to explore the galaxy, learn from other species, build something new. This peace offers us that chance." Thorn looked around the room at the faces watching him. his wife, his daughter, the younger members of his court. The human delegation, he saw hope in their expressions, not defeat. They weren't asking him to surrender with shame. They were asking him to lead in a new direction. "What if I refuse?" Thorn asked quietly. "What if I order the military to continue fighting?" "Then you'll be fighting alone," Vara said gently. "The people are tired of war, husband. They saw a human warrior defeat our greatest champion through determination and intelligence. They're starting to question the propaganda we've been feeding them. If you refuse peace now, you'll face internal opposition that may be worse than the war itself." Thorn was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked at Connor. "These terms you propose, they would apply to all of humanity's conflicts with other species?" "Yes," Connor confirmed. "We're not just at war with you. There are 3 other species we're in conflict with. We would offer similar terms to all of them." "So humanity isn't trying to build an empire," Thorn said slowly. "You're trying to build a coalition." "A community," Jake corrected. "Humans are social creatures, Emperor. We survive by building relationships, forming alliances, working together. That's what we want to do here, build something bigger than any one species. And if one of these other species refuses, if they keep fighting, then we'll keep defending ourselves," Jake said simply. "But we'll always offer peace first. We'll always try for cooperation over conflict. That's the difference between us and empire builders. We don't want to conquer. We want to coexist." Lyra watched her father's face as he processed this information. She could see him struggling with his pride, with his preconceptions about strength and power, but she could also see him beginning to understand. "I need time," Thorn finally said. "Give me 1 week to discuss this with my full council, to present these terms and build support for them." "Of course," Connor said. "We'll remain at our embassy. But Emperor, please understand, our patience has limits. If we don't see genuine progress toward peace, we'll be forced to assume you're stalling while you prepare for more war, and that would be unfortunate for everyone." The humans left. When they were gone, Thorn looked at his wife and daughter. "You both really believe this is the right path?" "I do," Vara said. "This is a chance to transform our empire from something built on conquest to something built on cooperation." "Father," Lyra said carefully, "may I ask you something? Why do we call ourselves an empire?" "Because we've conquered and absorbed many smaller civilizations," Thorn said. "It's what powerful civilizations do. But what if we could be something else?" Lyra suggested. "What if instead of an empire we could be part of a federation? A collection of different species working together, each bringing their own strengths?" "That sounds naive," Thorn said, but there was less certainty in his voice than before. "Does it?" Lyra challenged gently. "The humans have hundreds of different nations on their world. Different cultures, different beliefs, different ways of life. They fight sometimes, yes, but they also cooperate, trade, share knowledge, and protect each other. If one species can do that with itself, why couldn't multiple species do the same?" Over the following week, Lyra threw herself into the peace effort. She met with young court members who supported the treaty. She spoke with military officers who were tired of fighting. She even reached out to families who had lost members in the war, listening to their pain and their hopes. She also continued meeting with the human delegation. Connor taught her about diplomacy and negotiation. Jake, to her surprise, taught her about courage and leadership. He explained how human military commanders were trained not just to fight, but to protect their people and minimize casualties. "A good leader knows when to fight," Jake told her one afternoon in the embassy garden. "But a great leader knows when to stop fighting." "Is that why you gave Dravok so many chances to surrender?" Lyra asked. "Yes," Jake said. "I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to end the fight. Every moment he kept fighting was another chance for something to go wrong, for someone to die who didn't need to. Victory isn't about crushing your opponent. It's about achieving your goal with the least cost to everyone involved." "I think I'm beginning to understand humans," Lyra said. "You're not really as aggressive as you seem. You're defensive. You fight when you have to, but you'd rather not." Jake smiled. "Now you're getting it. Humans are persistence hunters, yes, but we're also social creatures who prefer cooperation. We only developed our fighting abilities because we needed them to survive. But survival and conquest are different goals." On the 6th day, Lyra was summoned to the throne room. When she entered, she found it packed with court members, military commanders, and advisors. Her father sat on his throne, looking tired but resolute. "My daughter," Thorne said formally. I have made my decision regarding the human peace proposal, and I want you to hear it directly from me. Lyra felt her hearts racing. This was the moment that would determine her people's future. I have spent this week listening to many voices, Thorne continued. Old advisors who want to continue the war. Young people who want peace. Military commanders who are exhausted. Families who have lost loved ones. And I have come to a difficult conclusion. He paused, and the room held its collective breath. I was wrong, Thorne said simply. I was wrong about humanity. I was wrong about the war. And I was wrong about what true strength means. Therefore, I accept the human peace proposal. The war is over. The Zynthian Empire will join humanity in building what they call a coalition for mutual benefit and protection. The throne room erupted in noise. Some cheered. Others protested. But Thorne raised his hand for silence. Furthermore, he continued, I am appointing Princess Lyra as our chief diplomat to the coalition. She will represent our interests in the Joint Council and work to build relationships with humanity and other species. Lyra stared at her father in shock. Father, I'm not qualified. I've never held any official position. You're more qualified than you think, Thorne said gently. You were the only one who saw the truth about the humans. The only one who tried to understand them instead of dismiss them. That wisdom and insight is exactly what we need going forward. But what about my marriage to Drevok? Lyra asked. The Korthan dynasty has withdrawn that offer, Thorne said. They consider it shameful that their prince was defeated. Which means you are free to choose your own path, daughter. So I ask you, will you serve your people in this new role? Lyra looked around the throne room at all the faces watching her. She thought about Jake Morrison facing his fears in the arena, about Connor Hayes patiently working for peace, about her mother supporting her, about the younger generation hoping for something better. Yes, she said firmly, I will serve. The formal peace signing took place 3 days later. It was held in a neutral space station between Zynthian and human territory. Representatives from both species gathered for the ceremony. Lyra wore formal robes marking her new position as chief diplomat. Jake Morrison and Connor Hayes represented humanity, both wearing formal dress uniforms. As they signed the treaty documents, Lyra caught Jake's eye. He gave her a small nod of approval. She nodded back, feeling grateful for the strange friendship that had developed between them. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Lyra found herself talking with people from both species, discussing ideas for future cooperation. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, joint scientific projects, mutual defense arrangements. The possibilities seemed endless. Later, she stood alone for a moment on an observation deck, looking out at the stars. Jake Morrison appeared beside her. Congratulations, diplomat, he said with a slight smile. Thank you, warrior, she replied. Then, more seriously, I wanted to thank you for teaching me about courage. I didn't teach you anything, Jake said. You had that courage all along. You just needed a reason to find it. You were afraid of me at first, but you faced that fear anyway. That's real courage. I'm still afraid sometimes, Lyra admitted. This is a huge responsibility. What if I fail? Then you learn from it and try again, Jake said simply. That's what humans do. We fail a lot. But we keep trying, and eventually we get it right. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Do you think this peace will last? Lyra asked. I think it has a better chance than most, Jake said. Because it's built on honesty and mutual respect, not domination. Will there be challenges? Of course. Will we disagree sometimes? Definitely. But if we keep talking, keep trying to understand each other, keep working together, then yes, I think it will last. Connor Hayes appeared with a group of young Zynthians who wanted to meet Jake. As the warrior was pulled into conversation, Lyra stayed at the window, thinking. She had been so afraid of Jake Morrison at first, afraid of what he represented, of what he could do, of the changes he might bring. But now she understood. Her fear had never really been about him. It had been about her own powerlessness, her own inability to control her future. By facing that fear, by standing up and taking responsibility for her own life and her people's future, she had found something valuable, not just courage but purpose. She mattered not because of who her father was or who she might marry, but because of what she chose to do, the actions she chose to take. In the arena, Jake Morrison had won a duel, but perhaps the more important victory was the one Lyra had won over herself. The victory over fear, over helplessness, over the belief that she couldn't make a difference. As she watched humans and Xinthians talking together, sharing ideas and laughter, Lyra felt hope for the first time in months. Maybe years. This was just the beginning. There would be difficulties ahead, misunderstandings, setbacks. But they would face them together, as partners rather than enemies. The war was over. But more importantly, something new was beginning. Something better. A community built not on conquest but on cooperation, not on fear but on mutual respect. And Princess Lyra, chief diplomat of the Xinthian people, was ready to help build it. She smiled and turned away from the window, walking back toward the reception, toward the future, toward the things she had once feared but now faced with courage. Jake Morrison had been right. The things we fear most are often the things we need to face, and sometimes in facing them, we discover who we truly are and what we're truly capable of. Lyra was no longer afraid of the human warrior. She was grateful to him, and she looked forward to working alongside him and his people to build a better future for everyone. The war had ended not with destruction, but with understanding, and that, Lyra thought, was the best victory of all.